What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first video of 2024, kicking it off with some gaming predictions for the year, which is a similar video that I did last year, both at the beginning of the year and then a follow-up later, of course, about how those predictions actually panned out. A lot of people seem to enjoy that, so I figured why not kick the year off right with exactly that. Some speculation, of course, about how things are going to go. So right here at the beginning, obviously this is speculation. I do, in fact, do a ton of game reviews, etc. But all of this is just purely guesses about what might happen, which is important to mention solely because I will be mixing it in with some things that we know have happened or have at least influenced my thinking here on a few of these. Hopefully some of these will pan out to be correct, whereas some of them might be hilariously wrong, which we'll talk about later this year. Now I want to kick this video off with the one I would say is probably the most likely because it was kind of hinted at, and that is DLC for Baldur's Gate 3. Obviously something that is hotly requested at the moment following the game's massive success. I've played and covered it quite a bit myself, including all the previous games, and I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that there is a demand for more content in that regard. And I'm sure Larian Studios knows it because in the updated epilogues that they added not all that long ago, the final send-off for that epilogue is to basically be ready for future adventures, which is a pretty on-the-nose hint about more to come. However, I do think there's a little bit of room for interpretation there, because I think taken a little more loosely, it could simply mean Larian's next adventure or game that they might be working on, as opposed to something specifically related to Baldur's Gate. However, given the size that Larian has grown to while working on Baldur's Gate 3, they could certainly support multiple projects at once, so it is not, I would say, unreasonable to me to expect that perhaps they have a few of their locations working on something like DLC and continued fixes for BG3, while the rest of their studios begin pre-production on another project, for instance. So for all of those reasons, I think more content in this regard is likely. But as a slightly more specific prediction, I'm hoping that they will announce a full-on expansion, much in the way the preceding games had, which I think, of course, would be great. Now, moving on to, I think, a little bit more contentious stuff, or at least perhaps unlikely maybe. With our second entry, I'm actually doubling down on a prediction from last year, which is that we will get some amount of news for a new Fallout game of some kind coming up. Last year, I mentioned that basically, Microsoft didn't spend all that money on ZeniMax and Bethesda for no reason, and that surely they would be putting some of this IP to work as opposed to letting Fallout rest on its laurels until the next mainline entry comes around, which is at best like a decade away, provided nobody besides Bethesda Game Studios works on it, which means I think it's incredibly likely that we get some sort of spin-off or remaster, etc., and we kind of have some leaks in that regard, but nothing's official till it's official, of course, and I think we're due an announcement outside of updates for already existing games. Now, some people like to point to the Fallout TV show that is upcoming as a development in that regard, and while that's great for the people who really enjoy Fallout or just other media in general, I also think it's worth pointing out that the video games industry is larger than both TV and music combined. So the idea that moving into one of those mediums would be some huge accomplishment just rings a little hollow for me. I mean, I'm happy to see it get made, don't get me wrong, but the idea that Microsoft wouldn't push something onto the much larger and more well-known media for that particular IP just seems silly to me. So to double down, I think Fallout is going to get some kind of video game related news this year in terms of a new game. And I'll take it one step farther this year in saying that if Microsoft does not do this and is not working on something like that, that is a very poor business decision on their part. I definitely think something is going on with that IP though, and the situation around it at this point is getting, frankly, a little strange. But nonetheless, moving on to my third prediction. This one is admittedly me just going against the grain for the sake of doing it, and if I'm being honest, I don't even totally expect it to happen by any means, and that is that Bloodlines 2 will come out and launch, of course, as it is slated to sometime this year, and that it will actually be pretty good, with the caveat that the follow-up DLC or sort of, let's say, roadmap that has already been announced for that game, despite it being quite a bit off from release already, is really going to bring down its critical reception. Again, though, this one is me just honestly hoping for the best, I suppose, because realistically, with all the trouble this game has been through, I don't think much of anyone is hoping for a resounding success in terms of that game. But I do love Vampire the Masquerade, so I am hoping it turns out well. But even as a fan of that setting and everything, I can acknowledge that even if that game is met with critical acclaim, the already announced DLC situation looks terrible, so I imagine that's going to bite into it one way or the other. But to summarize, I'm predicting that the game will come out, people will enjoy it quite a bit, but the DLC and the additional content later is going to really kind of sour everybody's mood on it. Which brings us to our fourth prediction, which is that Avowed is going to be a repeat of The Outer Worlds' critical reception. Avowed, of course, being a first-person fantasy RPG that is set in the world of Aora, or the Pillars of Eternity games. A setting I am personally very fond of. You can find reviews and even an entire lore series on that setting and world on this channel, actually, so I'm a big fan, needless to say. I really enjoy a lot of what Obsidian does and has done, including The Outer Worlds. I liked that quite a bit. But a lot of the reception around that game was simply that it was good but not amazing, especially for the people who wanted something more like another Fallout New Vegas. And Avowed looks much the same to me. I imagine that a lot of people like myself who really love Pillars of Eternity will likely enjoy it quite a bit, but just judging what they've shown from their recently revealed gameplay trailer and people's reaction to that gameplay and their sort of change in direction from their initial announcements and things, I get the impression that this game is going to find a very dedicated audience and people like myself probably, but that the wider response to this game is going to be a bit muted, which I only really see changing if they absolutely knock it out of the park, because a lot of people, pretty fairly I might add, seem to expect Obsidian to move fully into the AAA space now that they're under Microsoft's banner, and that just kind of doesn't seem to be happening with games like The Outer Worlds. And from what I can tell, Avowed doesn't really look AAA either, which means for everyone that isn't dedicated to that setting and world, I think there's going to be a pretty big difference between their expectations and what actually gets delivered. Don't misunderstand me though, I'm actually very excited for this game personally. I think it's going to be great, or at least will be great for myself, but I just don't see this game knocking it out of the park in terms of critical reception. But on this one, I genuinely hope I am very wrong. That brings me to my final prediction, which will simply be my Game of the Year prediction. Honestly, any year having to follow up 2023, which was an incredible year for gaming, is certainly in a rough spot. But there are a handful of games coming out this year that I think have potential to be really great, and reality is, as the year progresses, people will find all sorts of hidden gems, games that come out of left field and do way better than anybody expected, like Lies of P did this year, for instance, or even Baldur's Gate 3, which won Game of the Year. I cover that genre of games almost exclusively, or at least I specialize in it, and even I didn't see that coming in first place for Game of the Year prior to its release. So my point in saying that is simply that things happen, and this is an incredibly hard one to predict because of that. And you never really know how stuff like this is going to pan out until it is in people's hands, of course. So I fully expect this one to be wildly incorrect. But right here at the beginning of the year, I do have to admit that for me at least, I'm thinking Dragon's Dogma 2 has a real shot at it. Dragon's Dogma 1 was an incredible game, if a little bit niche. Dragon's Dogma 2 seems to be aiming at fixing all of the problems from the first game, including bringing an expanded world. Combine that with people seemingly being pretty excited about it in general, and you have a situation where I think if the launch of the game goes really well and the game meets people's expectations, then it certainly has a shot at the title. And as of right now, it's certainly the game I think has the best shot at it. But that is going to do it for this video and my gaming predictions for the year. By all means, let me know down below what you think about these, any predictions you might have, or, let me know that you'll be telling me I told you so later on when the results pour in late in the year. But as of right now, that's what I've got for you, so I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.